I don't know if I need to stand behind the microphone, but anyway, I'll lead into it. They are recording as well. So thank you so much for coming. I was texting my husband when there were 3 people in the room, like, oh my God, actually 3 people came, winning! And now there's 8 of you, so plus Barry, 9, right? Like that's amazing on a Monday when it's snowy and winter has come. So anyway, thank you for coming. It warms my heart. My name is Heather Linville, as Barry so graciously said. And in my day job, I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, UWL, and I prepare teachers to teach English as a second language. This year, I have the great fortune of being on sabbatical, and sabbatical means that I don't have to teach for the whole year. Instead, I get to do a research project, and this is my research project. And it's actually also a passion project for me, really close to my own story. So I'm really excited to be able to share it with you. And the project is meant to be a community conversation about belonging, migration, and multilingualism in our community, La Crosse. So I'm really glad you're here. The first thing I should do, of course, is to thank the sponsors. So, to do so, this project was sponsored by Wisconsin Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities and its A More Perfect Union initiative, the La Crosse Community Foundation with funds from the Community Giving Fund, and my own department at UWL, or I guess college at UWL, the School of Education, and my Department of Educational Studies, who granted me this sabbatical. So thank you to the sponsors. So the initial spark for this project, it originally came about because I, myself, am not from La Crosse. In fact, I've spent a lot of my life traveling, living in other places. I've lived in 4 different countries and 5 different states within the United States. And when I moved to La Crosse 8 years ago, I was born in the Midwest. I was born in Missouri. But when I moved here, I was like, wow, it's different. And of course, I experienced that every other place I have lived in my life. But I really started thinking about, who feels like they belong in a community? How do we start to feel like we belong in a community? It was the job that brought me here. So I had a place, I had employment, I had a home. But I really felt like, I started thinking a lot about, do I belong here? In fact, I had lived on the East Coast off and on for a lot of years, and I purposefully moved back to the Midwest to have that sense of home. And then to get here and be like, oh, I'm not sure I do, was kind of a challenge for me. And then at the same time, you all have probably seen signs like this around our community. We also have the signs people have in their yards that say, hate has no home here. And so I would see these, they're newer, they weren't here 8 years ago, but they started popping up, what, 2 or 3 years ago? I'm actually not sure. But anyway, I started seeing these signs and I was like, wow, what a great expression for our community, but is it true, right? Like, do we all feel welcome? And what does it mean if we don't? So, those were sort of the initial sparks that have been, ideas sort of in my head. And then when I started putting together this project, I had 2 fundamental ideas. So I'm going to talk to you, actually I'm going to show you a little video about the first one. So the first idea is that everyone is a storyteller and has a story to tell. I'm lucky to be in a book club here in La Crosse, which is part of what makes me feel like I do belong here now. So I read a lot, but I really believe that you don't have to be a published author to say you have a story to tell, right? Like all of us, and we are storytellers. So to make this a little meta, I made a digital story about a digital story project, so I'm going to show you a little clip of that. Let's see if I need to turn it on. This project is about stories. The stories we want to hear, the stories we need to hear, and the stories we do hear in our community. It's about what we can learn about ourselves and each other through storytelling. Storytelling is a fundamental human activity which connects us to each other. Everyone has a story to tell. So those are obviously some images taken from around La Crosse, and that was really the first idea, the first conceptual framework for this project, that really we're all storytellers, and it's important that we tell our stories. So the first phase of the project engaged multilingual individuals in creating a digital story. This person is actually my wonderful colleague, Polina Vinogradova. With the funding from the Wisconsin Humanities, she came from Washington, D.C., where she works at American University, and she was the co-facilitator of the workshop this summer. And these are folks engaging in this digital storytelling. Digital stories, they're short, 2 to 3 minute personal narratives, usually personal, autobiographical, and they use voiceover, background music, and images to tell a story. And what's really nice about them is that they can be shared widely. So this was the first phase. This happened over the summer. We were at a school right here in La Crosse, and there were 11 individuals, including 2 teacher assistants. They are actually UWL students. So 9 of the participants identify strongly as multilingual individuals, and then my 2 teacher assistants, they don't really consider that strongly part of their identity, but you're going to see one of their stories where it sort of comes out. And then I also want to give a shout out. So the graphics are really phenomenal. I didn't create them. The grant also paid for Lisa Lenars, who's an art professor art education professor at UWL, and she created all of the graphics, the banners, everything. So a shout out to her as well. So that was the first phase of the project, and that was the first idea, that we're all storytellers, and here are the folks creating their stories. But I also really, another foundational idea of this project is that we are all migrants. So I have had the good fortune of attending a little bit of training with the Reimagining Migration organization. They're out of California, and you all know in this country there's a lot of division about the idea of immigration. Who are we allowing into our country? How open should our borders be? What do we do if people have overstayed visas, things like that. But this project, this Reimagining Migration project, really takes a step back and says, migration is normal. So let me show you this little clip. And everyone moves. To migrate is also a fundamental human activity. We all move, across towns, across states, across countries. The reasons why and what happens when we move become the stories we share in our new communities. We Live in La Crosse, Stories of Belonging, hopes to spark a community conversation. Who feels they belong in La Crosse? What languages and cultures are in the stories we hear in our community? How can we come together as a community, live and work and study together in harmony across our different stories? So at this point, I'd like to ask the audience, how many of you were born in La Crosse? Oh, okay, I thought it was going to be 0 there for a second. Oh, and a surprise. Okay, I like that too. Oh, I didn't know you were born in La Crosse. So 3, which is fewer than half of our audience here. And if your hand was raised, keep it up if one of your parents was born in La Crosse. Okay, well, now we're down to 2. Grandparents? Barry, yes? And you also. So 2 out of our 8. I do this even, I've been presenting on these stories at middle and high schools, and even in the middle school, when you think probably everybody was born in La Crosse, they're so young. No, we have the same phenomenon where you end up at the end of those questions, just 3 or 4 hands raised. And so this idea of migration, I think it's really important to just reframe all those conversations as we all move. We all move all the time, if it's across town, across the state, like I said. Of course, there's positive reasons for migration. There's not so positive reasons for migration when people are fleeing dangerous situations. And of course, all of the political baggage that comes with all of that. But we all move. So, so I have, since the summer, had the privilege of sharing these stories in a few community spaces and also, as I mentioned, at a few schools. And I really hope that by sharing the stories of the individuals that created them this summer, that we can build some connection amongst people in our communities. And so really, I think maybe these questions were in the video too, but really these questions, I'm hoping that we can think about them. Yeah. So, should we watch some of the stories? Yay! So, they went away. Oh, there. So, a couple of things to tell you. I believe as an educator, if we're asking students or we're asking people to sort of be vulnerable and tell their own stories, that we need to do that ourselves. So one of the stories that is in this project is my story. I'm not showing it to you right now because it's not about me, but at the end there are postcards with the QR codes, so you can see all of the stories, or you can go to this website and find all of the stories. But just to throw that out there, I have a story out there too. So the first story I want to show you is Amina's story. Amina is a high school student who was born in La Crosse, but she has questions about her belonging and her home. And as you watch, you might want to think about the ways she feels like she belongs in La Crosse and the ways that she doesn't. So let me show you Amina's story. Sorry, I did want to say two more things. One, I'll put the subtitles on just because that can help all of us. And number two, these are not Hollywood produced movies. These are individuals, you know, learning some skills, some digital media skills, and putting together a story. So just to put all of that out there. There's also a big watermark in this story because we used a program that had a free version, but then when you saved it, it put a big watermark on there. So, yeah. All right, here's Amina's story.
When I was 5 years old, I traveled on an airplane for the very first time. My family and I were moving to Doha, Qatar, so my mom could teach there. It was going to be different. I was so excited to travel and live in a new place, but later I would find out just how much I missed my home in Wisconsin. Living in Doha was a new experience. It was a big city and very busy. There was often lots of construction and it could get very hot and dusty, but it was also a lot of fun. I made new friends and went swimming all the time. I enjoyed that year overseas, but when summer finally rolled around, I was so excited to go back to Wisconsin and see my family that I missed while I was away. But my parents had enjoyed living in Doha so much that we didn't just stay a few years like planned. Even though I liked Doha, I missed living in Wisconsin. Doha was a desert and I missed having snow in the winter. I missed seeing my grandparents, my cousins, and my aunts and uncles. Doha was wonderful, but as I grew older, I struggled to figure out where my home was. Was my home in Doha, where I lived most of the year, where I went to school, where I had my friends, where I went outside and played almost every day? Or was my home in Wisconsin, where I'd only lived a few years with most of my memories coming from pictures, where I visited every summer, where lots of my family lived, and where I longed to be living for most of the year? I always felt like Wisconsin was my home, and that I was just a visitor in Doha. But how could I claim Wisconsin as my home when I'd only lived there for a short amount of time? Both places had things that made me feel at home. How was I supposed to know which one was my home? What makes a place your home? How do we define what a home is? Is it the house you live in? Is it the people around you? Is it where you go to school, or what kind of food you eat? I lived in Doha for 10 years now, and I've learned that I'm not limited to only one home. My home is Wisconsin, but it's also Doha. My home is my family, and my home is my school. My home is my friends that I spend time with. My home moves all around with me. It changes and adapts all the time. My home comes with me no matter where I go. It shows up in the food I cook and eat, in the decorations I put up in my room, and in the music I play. Home does not have to be a physical place. Home is a feeling A feeling where you're comfortable, happy, and loved. I don't know where I'll end up in the future, but I'll always know where my home is. Part of my home is in Wisconsin, and part of my home is in Doha. Part of my home is in the people I love, and part of my home is me.
So what did you think? What did you notice in this story? I don't know if you feel like audience participation or not, but if anybody wants to share anything that they saw in this story. That's okay. So again, I mean, as a high schooler, right? I think she was 16 last summer. Maybe she's still 16. I don't know when her birthday is, but she was 16 when she created this. And I think it's pretty profound. She obviously has had experiences in her life that she's had to probably confront and grapple with, you know, ideas of home and belonging more than the average high schooler. But some pretty profound ideas. And I love how she comes to this resolution. I think it's the last one. Yeah, part of my home is me. You know, this idea that wherever I go, I can be at home. So, yeah, so this is the first story that I wanted to share with you. And I mentioned that this is supposed to be a community conversation. And I know putting people on the spot to talk, like, in this kind of group is awkward. But if you have a device and you would take 2 or 3 minutes, if you follow this link, it takes you to a Google form, and there are 4 questions. 3 questions that ask you sort of some ideas about the story, and then the last question just asks you if you're a middle school student, a high school student, or an adult. So they're anonymous, pretty low stakes, but it does give me a chance to think about some of the audience responses. So we'll take 2 or 3 minutes if you are able. If you have to stand up and get closer, it's okay. Sometimes the QR codes are fussy. story, Amina's story, is in one of the themes of the project, the first banner, home and belonging. The other story in that theme is my story. So we're going to move on to another, a different theme, which is journey and transformation. So I want to show you now a story by Deja. Deja is an adult who lives in La Crosse, and she tells the story of her journey coming to La Crosse. So I'll show you Deja's story.
When I share with people that I am from Venezuela, I often get asked this question: how did you end up here? Well, this is my journey here. My journey started in a different part of the world with a different language. Yo nací en Valencia, Venezuela, el 23 de junio de 1971. Soy hija única y crecí con mi mamá y mis abuelos maternos. Mi niñez fue llena de reuniones familiares, comida deliciosa y mucha educación. Teníamos reuniones familiares casi todos los meses, especialmente para celebrar la Navidad, el Año Nuevo y los cumpleaños. El plato favorito de mi niñez son las arepas. Otros platos favoritos son tajadas y hallacas. La educación fue siempre parte de mi vida. Mi mamá era maestra y para cuando se retiró era la directora de una escuela. When I was 25, I made one of the biggest decisions in my life. I moved to London to learn English as a second language. This decision has impacted my life until today. While attending college in London, I also traveled to many places. This experience opened up a whole new world to me. It was through this experience that I discovered my passion for diversity and cultures. It was at this moment when I decided that I always wanted to be in an environment that allows me to interact with different cultures. Unfortunately, by the time I decided to go back to Venezuela, the political and economic situation there had taken a turn for the worse. It was at that moment when I became an immigrant. In London, I worked as a part-time nanny for a few families. One of those families was from the US. When it was their time to come home, I came with them. That is how I ended up in the Chicago area. Here, in the US, I have lived in 3 different states: Illinois, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. Here, in the US, I started my own family. I have an amazing daughter. She's the best thing that has ever happened to me. And I have my 2 cats. Here, in the US, I decided to go back to school. I graduated with my bachelor's and master's degree. Here, in the US, I finally found a profession I love. I work at a college in international education, which allows me to express and grow my passion for diversity and cultures. Now I ask myself, what is here? And the answer is
okay, so that is Deja's story. Did you notice anything different, maybe? Oops. Between, oh my goodness, what happened? Hold on. Deja. Ooh. But now I realize, well. Oh, I opened the wrong one. Hold on one second. Sorry. I had 2 PowerPoints open. I think I just opened the wrong one. So yeah, so did you notice anything different about Deja's story? There it is. In comparison to Amina's? Besides the actual story? Anything she did differently?
Deja was older. She was in charge. She was making decisions on her own.
Excellent.
Yeah, I was just going to say it seems like the first story was more of a family making a choice, whereas this story had other factors that may not have been
Her choice.
a choice.
Yeah, right. So sort of that I'm migrating because I want to versus, or my family wants to, versus I'm migrating because I have to. Yeah, and her story, I think Deja's story is pretty poignant when she says, at that moment I became an immigrant. Her plan wasn't to, live in England forever. Her plan was to go back to Venezuela, but then, the fallout there. And in terms of the digital storytelling, Deja is a little bit more, well, I don't know if sophisticated is the right word. Deja uses the affordances of digital multimodal composing in a little different way. Did you notice anything about how she put the story together? She had 3 sections, right? And what happened in each section? Yeah, she changed the music. And in fact, even in the first section, she was speaking in Spanish, right? So Deja's an amazing person. I just like to point that out. Like, she's pretty, it doesn't hit you over the head, but you're like, oh yeah, right? There was different music with each stage of her journey. She used different language to really accentuate how she had transformed. And I also like to point out that she says this phrase over and over. Here in the US, I had my daughter. Here in the US, I went back to school. Here in the US, here in the US. And then at the end, just written on the screen is this here equals home, which I think is pretty powerful. Okay, so if you don't mind doing the same, answering some questions about this story, that would be, amazing. There it is. Again, a QR code. Similar types of questions, but specific for this story.